Title of the message today for Genesis 49, verses 1 through 28, is Jacob blesses his sons. Jacob blesses his sons. Last time, you remember, Genesis chapter 48, we saw Jacob bless Joseph's sons. And the title of that message, if I remember right, was Jacob rewards Rachel's righteous son, right? So there were elements of that title that kind of summed up the whole chapter. First of all, Jacob is doing this sort of a blessing here, and it's a reward for Joseph and all that he had done, the way he had instrumentally been used by God to bring all these things about, that they had come together, the promises of God made to Jacob, that as a company of peoples all together they would begin to experience and live in the blessings of God, the blessings promised to Abraham, and these sorts of things. That was never going to happen the way things were going in their family. So it was never going to happen. And then Joseph was sold as a slave, but because of his character and his faithfulness to God, he was instrumental in bringing all these things about. And so he was rewarded for that. Also tied to that, so that's his reward. It's for his own righteousness, but he is Rachel's righteous son. And you remember also there was this curious instance in Genesis chapter 48 where Jacob begins to talk about having to bury Rachel on the road, and he just wasn't able to honor her properly. And it seemed kind of out of place, but when we really begin to consider it, it's more a connection with this idea that someone who he wanted to honor, whom he loved deeply and cherished, he was not able to honor in this life. And he comes now to the end of his life, and he's thinking, I want to honor my son Joseph, whom I should honor and whom I love. And so he is not willing to die with that regret. That's one of the many lists of regrets he will have to die with. He's going to cross that off the list. And so he seeks to honor his son Joseph, and he does that by giving him a double portion of the blessing. And he does that in a very curious way. He adopts Joseph's two sons, probably the only two sons he had at that point, but maybe he had some others, but at least the two that were born before Jacob ever got down to Egypt, those two sons would be adopted as sons of Jacob and would receive an inheritance with all the others. He'd be on equal footing, just as Reuben and Simeon. And then more than that, Joseph's later sons, any descendants he had after that, would not be counted as Joseph's, but as somehow they would be ordered under Joseph's other two sons. So he would just have Joseph, instead of being one of 13 pieces of the inheritance, would be 2 of 14 pieces of the inheritance. All right? Or rather 2 of 14. And so that's the way this would work out. You'd still have the double portion belonging to whoever got firstborn status, but then you would also have this double portion that would go to Joseph, would be split among his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. But also in that, there was this curious thing that happened where Jacob was determined that he was going to switch the birthright, or the order, among Joseph's sons. He would put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh in his pronouncing of the blessing. And he pronounced the same blessing on them both, but there was a kind of an underscore, a bold lettering for Ephraim's blessing. And he was ordered in front of Manasseh as a result of that. And all the way through Israel's history, you find them said that way again and again, Ephraim and Manasseh, Ephraim and Manasseh. And it's the opposite of their birth order, the opposite. Most people who knew the lads would have talked about them, although at this time, remember, they're at least 17. They're probably around 20 years old each. And this was the scene. Now, that whole scene was occasioned by something that happens in Genesis 48 at the very beginning. After this, Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So he takes his sons with him to go visit his father. That scene then takes place, and right after that in Genesis 49 we open, then Jacob called his sons and said, called all of them, gather yourselves together, right? So this is how Genesis 49 opens up. I don't want to read the whole text because I think it will be tiresome to do that without explanation as I go. We'll just kind of just have read it. So we're gonna read it a section at a time as we go through. My Bible has kind of headings and paragraphs and things in it. Some of yours do not. And at the end of verse 27, it finishes this section and then starts a new one for verse 28. And I want to take verse 28 and slide it up together with this first half of the chapter because it's just a summation. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. So that's going to go on up with what we've got here. In verse 29, we'll start a new section. Then he commanded them and said to them, right? So that'll be different. I say that, and it's important here in a minute when we begin to consider what's here for us and the way to understand this text. So with all that said, I'd like to just pray and then begin to consider what we have before us and learn what we can. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we again gather together underneath the banner of Christ, and sitting before us are the words of God. And we ask for Christ's sake that you take these words, bless them to us, minister to us in this time. Make the words and the meaning plain. Make their implication and application for us obvious and clear, memorable, that we might leave here having been transformed by your word. Admittedly, this is a text that I think most often we just kind of read through and on to the next chapter where maybe there are some statements that are made which tend to stick with us more. But these are important things for Israel. These are important things, therefore, for us. We want to see their weight and their importance and not forget and not take lightly any part of your word. We ask for this help in the name of Christ. Amen. Well, we come again to this curious passage. We read about in these verses a custom we really no longer have. This sort of end-of-life blessing of your children is not particularly common or even known in the West. I would suspect you've never seen anything even like this unless it was in a movie or in a play. Probably never seen a real-life demonstration of this, right? It's just very uncommon for us, particularly in the West. We do have times when we gather loved ones when death is near. I made reference to that in my message last time, right? Joseph heard his father had gotten ill. He gathered his children, and he went to visit him. It's what you do. We had a similar scene in my family a couple years ago. This is what happens. You gather together. But usually, this is merely to say your goodbyes, perhaps to reconcile, and that's a reality. Times their family members are at odds and someone's dying and you hear of it and you think, I just need to go. I need to go. Even though I've not seen him in 15 years, we've not spoken, I'm going to go. Right? That happens. And those are momentous events when they happen. If they happen, right? A lot of times you hear the person died and you didn't get to reconcile. You hear about those things all the time. Or perhaps you go just to be there with family, right? That happens, right? Like some of my children, it was great grandpa. I didn't really know him very well, but everyone's going to be there. We're all there. Like I don't know, and they could tell you individually, but I don't know how much he meant to any of them, right? When he was passing. He meant a lot to me. And they know that. To some of them, they don't have any memories, really, of him. Others have significant ones. So they're just there to be with them. Because an important family member of someone you love is dying. So you go. There's those sorts of things that we know in our culture. But this is a very different sort of thing than gathering around the family patriarch as he, with all of his heart and mind, begins to dole out blessings upon the family for their future, typically this would be done invoking the help of God to bring about his pronouncements. They would do this sort of thing with the implied prayer and petition to God that these things would come to pass. These are sacred times. But even for a people for whom this sort of thing would be common, there are some startling differences in this chapter from what would typically be done. In this scene, we find some very unusual things. I don't want to just come out with what those are. We'll come to those in turn as we go through the text. But one of the first things to say, as we look at this overall, is that it's curious, if you would bother to count, you would notice that there are 12 blessings that are given. Really, there are 11 blessings that are spoken, but there are 12 sons of Jacob who are called out by name and given a blessing. This is curious. You might wonder why. I mean, it was just in the chapter before that he took Joseph's 2 sons and put them on equal footing with these others. And so if he has 12 sons, and then he's added 2, you might think, well, there'd be 14 blessings. Or maybe, since Joseph's other sons and descendants are going to be counted as these other 2 sons, instead of 12 plus 2, you have 12 plus 2 is 14, minus Joseph, because his name is now passed on with his 2 sons. So you'd have 13 blessings. Instead, we have 12. It's strange. And we find the answer to this in terms of number in verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a spring. His branches run over the, and it goes on, but his 2 sons aren't mentioned. It's very strange. It's like, did you forget? No, he didn't forget. All I can say is that it appears even in later Israel's history that Ephraim and Manasseh are commonly referred to as Joseph. They just are. And Joseph settled his land. We'll look at that one of those texts later, but when they're settling through the land, and things, it's like, well, you have Ephraim and Manasseh are treated separately, but then later they're described as well in Joseph, or the tribes of Joseph, or the clans of Joseph. It's described in that way. Joseph settled his land. Benjamin is allotted land between Judah and Joseph. But Joseph doesn't have land. Well, he does, but it's just, sometimes they refer to them separately, sometimes under the name of Joseph. And so he's doing that here. That's our answer for that. So just in terms of a number, that's a little bit jarring when we first come to it, because he just went out of his way to increase the number to 13 instead of from 12. It's also strange that though there are 12 sons blessed in this chapter, 2 of them are grouped together and share a common blessing, that of Simeon and Levi. They're just paired together. Everyone else gets their own, but we just group them together. That's strange as well. Also consider the nature of the blessings. These are blessings, right? Not all of the blessings seem like blessings. If we were just to read verses 3 through 7, let's just look. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So we've seen this sort of thing in Genesis before, but this blessing is a non-blessing. Time for your blessings, cursed be. And it's like, well, hey, that's not on the agenda for today. We came here thinking we were going to be blessed. No, not so. Not for you. It's similar in some ways to what happened with Esau, right? Don't you have a blessing for me? No, I gave it to your brother Jacob. Nevertheless, all those good things that you want, away from those things shall be your inheritance. It's like, what? But you'll survive by war and bloodshed, and you'll make it. It's like, well, thanks for the non-blessing blessing, right? And this is what we have for them. So that's not unique, but it is a little bit unexpected. So they're not all blessings. But the second thing to notice is verses 1 and 2. I think this is important to understand this. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together that you may receive your blessings." Nope. What did he say? Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. He's saying, I'm going to prophesy. Not, I have a blessing that I hope comes to pass, but rather implied here would be something like, God has shown me what will come to pass, and I'm going to declare it to you. Therefore, verse 2, assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob, listen to Israel, your father. Pay attention. But then if you go down to verse 28 and listen to the way Moses sums up his statements, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. So it's described both ways. So I think the idea is this. Jacob is dying. He knows he's dying. The news has gone out. Joseph came, brought his sons. That happened. Maybe they left, or maybe from there they sent on for the other brothers. And they've all come together, right? But Jacob's words, before they get there, either they're on their way or they haven't thought to come yet, he sends out, he says, gather yourselves together. So as he has been thinking about the future of his descendants that he's leaving behind, and imagining what their futures might be in the land, and what their lives might be in the meantime before they get there, he's had all kinds of thoughts run through his mind. But there are some things that have come to him in his mind in ways that are vivid, that stand out, maybe in a vision or a dream or a near audible word or something, some way, or a messenger has come to him from God directly, that's happened to him before, or some thought has come to him with such conviction that he cannot escape it, and he knows, because he's heard from God before, this is from God. And he speaks these things confidently knowing this is what shall come to pass. And he exhorts his sons to give special attention and heed to these things. But as he had envisioned all this, he had been thinking about blessing them. And so he comes, and the words that he says are not just, well, these are the things that will happen. They are prophecy, but they are both prophecy and blessing. And so that matters to me in how I interpret these words. And what I mean is this: unless I have something in this text that clearly tells me this statement is a negative, I want to try to read it as a blessing, as a positive. So there are some of the texts in here where some of the things that are said where interpretations and commentaries really divide as to, well, I don't know, it could be interpreted this way and that's good, or this way is really bad, and there are some bad things that happen in their future, and this is a bad thing, and so that must be what it means. And I want, for my part, I can just tell you, my prerogative, my default is going to be to read these as a positive, not as a negative. So I'm just showing you my cards. And I do that because I think Moses encourages us to do that. That unless there's something that explicitly tells us this is a negative for them, that you just read it as a positive. And accept it that way. So anyway, so that's where I'm at in terms of the nature of the blessings and how all this works. Jacob is a man constrained, I think, by fatherly love to disclose to his descendants, to declare to them what it is that God has shown him about their future in the land to where they'll be going one day. And therefore, there is added importance that they pay attention carefully to the words he declares. So this is a time of handing out blessings, but more than that, it's also a time in which God is declaring to the people of Israel, through their namesake patriarch himself, the man Israel, a prophecy concerning their futures together. Now, the last bit of curious trivia, you might say, about this chapter, before we dive in and really begin to flesh all this out, is the ordering of the statements, the ordering of the blessings or the declarations, these statements that are made. These prophecies, you might call them, are generally by mother. And you might miss that because it starts with Reuben, who's his firstborn, and then Simeon and Levi, who are the next, and then Judah, who's after that, and you just think, oh, okay, this is how it's going. But it's by mother, generally. The first 6 are the sons of Leah. Now, she did not have the first 6 of his sons, but she had the first 4, then later she had 2, but the first 6 are all grouped together. Then we have the first son of Rachel's maidservant, Bilhah, which was not the 7th. Then we have the 2 sons of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant. So you've got the 6 sons of Leah, right? And here's Rachel, then here's Zilpah and Bilhah. So you got 6 sons of Leah, then we get 1 for Bilhah, then we do the 2 for Zilpah, then we do the last remaining one for Bilhah, and then we go to the last 2 for Rachel. And it's like, what? It's not the birth order. It's sort of the order of the women. You have, you had Leah, right? And then the next one to give, then you have the next one to give birth, which was Bilhah. But we don't do both of them. We just do one of the children. Then we go back and we get Zilpah's 2. And then we go back and clean things up over here and get Bilhah's. And then we go and finish at Rachel. And it's just strange the way to do it. Why that order? Well, I don't know. I don't know. But there's more. Even Leah's sons are not in birth order, which you could miss. The last 2 are switched. Issachar and Zebulun are switched so that Zebulun is put before Issachar. No statement is made about it. It's not pointed out. But you can bet that everyone in Israel understood it and realized what happened. I don't know why. There are other times, like we've talked about these things. In Genesis, there's other times where orders have been switched. And we say, well, why is that? And there is an answer that is presented to us that we can figure out. And I'm not here to say that there is no answer contained anywhere in the Bible to this question, but I haven't found it. So I'm just going to tell you, I don't know what the reason is for that. If it's significant, it obviously would have had significance in some way to the people of Israel, but I don't know what it is. I couldn't tell you. Zebulun here seems to be put ahead of Issachar. It may simply be that it's intended to be a bit of a greater blessing for him among the sons of Leah. Issachar is put last for some reason. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions, but I'm not open to rampant speculation, right? So that's where we are. All right. One more thing here. The structure of the statements. You may have noticed this yourself when you read through the text. Mostly the statements are very short and very brief. Consider that 5 of them, 7 if I include Issachar and Dan, but 5 of them for sure are like super short statements. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. That's it? Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. That's it? Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. That's it. It's just so quick, right? And I would consider Issachar and Dan in there. They have a little bit more that's said, but not much. It's very short. So 7 of them are very short. 3 of them are non-blessings. Right at the beginning, he gets them out of the way. So that leaves 2. 7 plus 3 is 10. There's only 12 blessings. There's 2 more blessings, and those are huge. Judah and Joseph receive these big, huge, long blessings. One receives the firstborn, and the other sort of a double blessing. And they get lots of text, lots of space here. So he had much more to say to them. Judah and Joseph, very lengthy blessings. So just notice that as you go through and pay attention to it. They're definitely singled out as those that receive the greatest blessing or that have the most significance in terms of Israel's future. So with all that said then, I think we're in a position to begin with Reuben and to just work our way through these things. And what I want to do is to consider the declaration and the fulfillment, because these things are prophecies, right? The declaration and the fulfillment, tribe by tribe, okay? And we had 2 hours, and how long was it? 30? No, I'm joking. So anyway, it won't take that long, I promise. The reason it won't take that long is not because we couldn't easily spend that much time really settling in on these tribe by tribe and ferreting out all the different things in Scripture and how these things really came about, but simply because I don't feel like it's worth your time in this setting for me to do that. It's worth your time to do it, but it's not worth your time in this setting for us to do that. And so I have a sort of an exhorting purpose I have for this message, and so I want to, for that reason, kind of do these things more by summary. So with Reuben then, what does he say? Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So what do we have here? So here's Reuben. And it's all, like the first half of, or verse 3 reads like a what could have been. What should have been for Reuben. You are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength. Preeminent in dignity. This was an honor that was given him. Preeminent. He was firstborn, preeminent in dignity, preeminent in power. For he seemed to have been the strongest, right? Not just because he was older and the others weren't mature yet, but he was just physically more imposing than the rest, right? He was shrewder than the rest. He was just with it in so many ways. If you look out upon the sons, you would choose one for leadership, one for preeminence, and it would be the one that was firstborn. Like in every way you look at it, he deserved to be preeminent among his brothers. He was the one. But he was so unstable, right? Think about like water. You've got, it's massively powerful. You dam it up and there's so much potential in that water. But it just bursts through and there's just no good. You can't do anything with it. He's unstable as water. Because of that, he won't have preeminence. For all of his fine attributes and qualities and things to commend himself, there's this fatal flaw. He's completely unstable. He doesn't walk in wisdom. He doesn't listen to command. He doesn't follow God. He's totally unstable. Because of that, you won't have preeminence. You won't be honored in this way. And you knew it was coming, Reuben. You knew this was coming. Because you went up to your father's bed. Remember that scene? When Jacob was sort of weak in the family and viewed that way, he was in a low state in terms of his leadership, and Reuben sought to take advantage and slept with his father's concubine. Not in, as we would think of it, just some matter of, incestuous scene, but it was rather a power play. He would go in and basically claim his father's wives, as a conquering king would claim the harem of the king he conquered, to claim her as his own and to take the place of ruler in the family. But it didn't work. The brothers didn't follow. Everyone, instead of saying, yeah, right on, he's the one we'll follow, they all just looked at with shock and horror at what he had done. And his father judged him for it. You went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. Now imagine they're all gathered together. And maybe your kids and grandkids are here too. And the patriarch looks and says, you had all these things going for you, but you're so unstable, you won't be preeminent because you went up to your father's bed, and he points to him, and then you defiled it. And then he looks at everyone else. It's amazing. It shifts to and it's not the first person anymore. You, then he went up to my couch. That's how unstable and just irrational and unbelievable this offense was. He just turns in the middle and just condemns him in front of everyone. Can you believe what he did? Now, how is this fulfilled? For all of his dignity and all of his strength, for all the preeminence he could have had, he won't have it. He was marked and remembered by this defilement. Where I'll just say this in summary fashion, Reuben's inheritance was on the east side of the Jordan, kind of on the fringe of the nation. All the dealings and happenings of the people, the capital wasn't in Reuben's land. The Reubenites were out there on the other side. They get ready to enter into the promised land. They say, this is good enough for us. You guys just go on in. We're good here. They certainly aren't preeminent among the sons, right? They're periphery. They're out there on the outskirts of things. They're not with the rest. They also, you might remember, Moses, the one who's writing these things, had his leadership challenged by these Reubenites, the tribe of Reuben. But that was put down. They are mentioned in the song of Deborah in Judges, but outside of that, they play very little role in the entire history of Israel. There's like an afterthought. They were there. They're the also-rans in the history of Israel, right? Right? These are the leaders. This was first place, second place, third place. This guy was almost there, but he got hurt, and there's a story there. But who else participated? Well, there were a couple more. This guy and this guy. They just also ran. That's the fate of Reuben in the history of Israel. It's amazing. Moving on then, verses 5 through 7. Simeon and Levi together are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Right? You think, well, what else is a sword? Well, a sword might be, in some sense, a weapon of violence, but typically it would be a weapon of protection, a weapon for defense. It might do violent things, but here the violence idea is an aggressive violence, is an unprovoked violence. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Now, surely this is a reference to the events we've already read in Genesis chapter 34, where Dinah, their sister, was defiled, and they went in to Shechem, right? And they slaughtered the city. They lied to them. Right? They entered into covenant with the people of that city, the leaders and the rulers there, and they slaughtered them. When they had circumcised themselves and they were still sore, it says, right? They went in and slaughtered them. The men can't defend themselves, and they struck down the city. And they were the leaders of this. It says that the sons of Jacob did this, and I believe that they did as a group. But these men were the leaders. These were the ones who were entering into covenant, who were making all of this happen. He lays the guilt of all this at their feet primarily. It says, in their anger they killed men. That's clear enough. And in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. That's the one that we don't read about in Genesis 34. What does that mean? It's probably a reference to the same time, the same incident. And you can imagine what would they have done to their concern in this incident doesn't seem to be to gain something. They didn't sack Shechem and loot it and get all the things for themselves. That wasn't their primary goal, though there was some of that. It seemed to be to make a statement, a threat, a warning to anyone in the land who might do them wrong. And you could see that if they were to go in and willfully hamstring these oxen, which would be something like, you've got these beasts of burden, right? Their use is to pull your plow, it's to carry heavy loads. It requires a hamstring in terms of muscles to do this. Well, you take a knife and you cut the tendon of that hamstring and it's totally useless now. They can still limp around and walk, but it's not going to do any work for anybody. But to willfully do that is quite a thing. And it's specifically mentioned here. And in their willfulness, they hamstring. There was no reason for it. They just went around and just, because these animals belonged to them, just because. Notice also, just remember, in context, this is not a situation of righteous anger, but of wanton anger. Right? Their weapons are not weapons of righteousness, but of violence. Right? The whole thing is characterized as an evil act. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. What happens then? I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. There's a couple of things that are curious to me in this. First of all, in verse 6, let my soul not come into their counsel, O my glory, be not joined to their company. You could read that a couple ways. On the one hand, like the glory of Israel won't be joined to their company. That's a hard thing to do when the glory of Israel is God and His presence. And the people of Levi are charged later with protecting that presence, where the glory of God manifests itself. So it seems like a strange thing. That certainly didn't come to pass if we read it in that way. But I think the idea is, let my soul not come into their counsel, O my glory, be not joined to their company. Those things that the people, his request, I think, is something like this, his statement here. Those things that the people of Israel are most identified with, most known for. Let my soul, O my glory, right? The glorious things about the nation of Israel. The soul of this man, be not joined to their company. Don't let me be joined to them. Well, who are they? Well, in their anger they killed men, in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, it's fierce, their wrath, it's cruel. Let not my people, my descendants, be connected with that kind of activity and action. That's not to be our inheritance. That's not to be our memory, our glory, what we're known for in the world. I don't want that. Right? And it's not just a request he has, this is a prophecy. And I think the idea is the nation of Israel would not be known for these things. They wouldn't take instead of the nation of Israel sort of taking on their persona and attitude and the way they were towards those who wronged them, the people of Israel would be a different sort of people. I think is the nature of what he's saying here. But then in terms of their consequence, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. We'll look at that in a moment. But this is really strange. I will divide them in Jacob? You're not doing anything. You're going to be dead in the grave. He switches here. He speaks as if God himself, like he's God's mouthpiece. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Because Jacob isn't going to do that at all. God's going to do that. He doesn't do that with the rest of them. It's such a curious thing. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Again, it's as though he's speaking as if he were God himself here. It's really strange. And to me, it just goes to the heart of this idea that he is in these statements acting as a prophet. He's not just saying things that he wants or I've asked God to do this or anything. He's saying, I will do this. And it's because in his words, God is speaking. Now, Levi is obvious and known to all of us. We all are aware that the tribe of Levi did not receive an inheritance in the land, but they received rather cities that were scattered throughout the people of Israel. This is what happened to the tribe of Levi. So we understand how they were scattered. But less known, and certainly some of you will know this, but less known is what happened to Simeon. Because if you look, if you just go, if you have in the back of your Bible, I hope you do, one of these maps of the tribes of Israel, and you could look there and you could see Simeon has its own allotment. And you just think, oh, well, they had their place. But if you look a little more carefully, you'll see it's surrounded by Judah. Right? Their land is surrounded by Judah. So they're within another place. They're kind of swallowed up by Judah. But more than that, if you'll read, and we'll look at a couple texts. Let's go to Joshua chapter 19. Joshua chapter 19. Verse 1. The second lot came out for Simeon, for the tribe of the people of Simeon, according to their clans, and their inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of the people of Judah. Right? And they had for their inheritance, and he lists a bunch of towns. Verse 6, 13 cities with their villages. Then verse 7, 4 cities with their villages, together with all the villages around these cities as far as Baalath Beer, Ramah of the Negev. This was the inheritance of the tribe of the people of Simeon according to their clans. The inheritance of the people of Simeon formed part of the territory of the people of Judah, because the portion of the people of Judah was too large for them. The people of Simeon obtained an inheritance in the midst of their inheritance. So think of this. Why did Simeon get anything? Because Judah had so much, they didn't even have enough people to possess it. We need some help. And Simeon's like, could we get some? He's like, all right, here's some cities. Here's 13 of these cities. You can have those 13 cities there. And there's some little villages there, and you can have those. And there's some 4 other cities over there, and some villages there. And you can, as far down as there's that spot down the road, you can go over to there. But then, we want the rest of that over there. Okay. And that's what you get. That's it. Also, their tribe was reduced. If you look at the count in terms of the numbers of how many people from this tribe to this tribe, they were reduced massively. They were not going to possess anywhere. It was just a little part of another tribe. And so the inheritance of the people of Simeon formed part of the territory that had already been given to Judah. Like Judah had all of this, and they're just like, it's too much. We got a lot of land, and we can't have it all. It's like what happens in America when we settle the West. It's like, just go out there. It's free. We'll just divide it up, and if you can live on it, it's yours. Right? And this is what Simeon gets. Right? Judah just says, we've got way too much. And Simeon's like, well, we'd like some. Here you go. Right? Because the portion of the people of Judah was too large, therefore the people of Simeon had got an inheritance in the midst of their inheritance. So, very much that way. And then they kind of end up eventually kind of just disappearing from the records and things. They're just not there anymore. The tribe of Simeon. It's just not listed. They're just swallowed up in Judah in a very real sense. And so, it seems to have come to fulfillment. Now Judah. We come to Judah. Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 through 12. Judah, your brothers, future tense, shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Now, if you're familiar a little bit with Song of Solomon, then some of this language might make some sense to you. But to have dark eyes and white teeth, right? Sometimes in the Scripture, white teeth is a form of judgment. Like you have cleanliness of teeth, right? That's no good. Like you want to be someone who eats and you got You got to pick something out of your teeth every now and again. You don't want to be someone who never has anything ever in your teeth. We look at that as strange. We think, well, goodness, what kind of hygiene is there? It's not that they didn't pick things out of their teeth, but you wouldn't want to be in a situation where that was never an issue. Right? I mean, kids, like you might say, oh, I'd love to not have to brush my teeth. You'd love to maybe not be made to brush your teeth, but you wouldn't like to not have the problem of ever having anything on your teeth to brush off, right? In this instance, the whiteness of teeth is like they're milky white. They're beautiful. You have clean teeth. You've got good hygiene. You've kept yourself well. You're beautiful. And this is the way his eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. There's something just desirable, beautiful, altogether lovely about one who comes from Judah. What else do we read? Okay, your brothers shall praise you, verse 8. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Right? So your enemies aren't going to capture you or do anything. You're going to put your hand on their neck. You'll be victorious in battle. All your father's sons shall bow down to you. There's possibly a connection there. Possibly it's the victory you won that causes them to bow. But regardless, they'll bow. That's the way kingship usually works, right? It's the man of war, the man of valor who usually becomes king. Judah, and how does he describe him here? Judah is a lion's cub. Well, we might look at that and think, oh, that's cute, right? Well, I'm sure Selena's looking at that and thinking, oh, this little lion's cub. Like, that's not what it means. It means he's the offspring of a lion, right? Don't think the little cub. Think, here's little Judah now, and he's a little cub. But he's a lion's cub. And what happens? Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you've gone up. You've killed. You've conquered. And you've come up. What did he do? He stooped down. He crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? He's just ready to pounce. This is what it looks like. When you look at Judah's history, this is what Jacob foresees. The scepter, that is the royal staff, the right to rule, shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So he's going to rule and be in charge until there's a time where his end will reign, and that reign will end when tribute comes to him and the obedience of the peoples is secured. And what will it look like when that happens? It'll be wonderful. It'll bring blessing and prosperity. Binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. That is a picture of prosperity. Here's a man he was a warrior. He conquered. His brothers are bowing down to him. He's ruling in the midst of all these people until finally the obedience of the peoples is his. And what does he do then? He gets off his colt. He gets off these beasts of burden. They don't have work to do anymore. Binds them to the vine without a care in the world and sits down and washes his clothes and enjoys what he's done. And he himself then is beautiful. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Well, first of all, we'd say in terms of what this confers to Judah is the right of the firstborn, the right to rule among his brothers in his family, the right to rule. Moreover, that right will not depart until he receives the obedience of the peoples. And if we don't have the New Testament and the fulfillment of all this in the Lord Jesus Christ, it's a very curious statement. Because even though they ruled by and large, you could not describe, I don't think, the line of Judah from David on ruling and gaining the obedience of the peoples. They seem to be always rebelling continually, even David. Solomon's kind of the only one. But he dies, and then it's just, they lose 10 of the tribes. It's not good. So I don't see this as being fulfilled primarily in Israel's history, except to say that the scepter did not depart from Judah until this one came, Jesus. And the scepter is still in Judah, the right to rule. He still has it. And he will rule until he gains all the obedience of the peoples. And I just want to turn with you to 1 Corinthians 15 and read where Paul says the same thing about the Lord Jesus Christ. In speaking about the resurrection, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, beginning in verse 22, we'll start in verse 21, "For as by a man came death, so by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. But each in his own order. Christ the firstfruits, then it is coming those who belong to him. And then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet." Right? Until he gains the obedience of all the peoples, he's going to rule. And it says here, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." And here, until this happens, Jesus rules. The last enemy to be destroyed is death, for God has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when it says all things are put in subjection, it is plain that he is accepted who put all things in subjection under him. When all things are subjected to him, that is Jesus, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things in subjection under him, that God may be in all. So there's one day what will happen is Jesus himself will wrap all this up as a bow and give it to the Father and take his place with us and say, "I've fixed it all. Everything is under your rule and authority. And I, as a man now, because I became a man, I'm eternally a man, am also here under you." God is all in all. It's quite a thing. So this is the fulfillment of that. Now then, we can go pretty quickly through most of the rest of these. Zebulun, verse 13, "shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon." Now, turn with me to your map and scratch your head. Zebulun. If you look towards the top, it's surrounded by other tribes, and there doesn't appear to be water in sight. It's a very curious statement. "Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon." Well, Sidon isn't on my map of the 12 tribes of Israel. Sidon's not even there. But if you look at the top left, you might see Tyre. Sidon's further north yet along the coast. So he's definitely not bordering Sidon. And he's no haven for ships. And he's not on the shore of the sea. Geographically. None of these things seem very realistic, very much like they came to pass. It's the sort of thing that if you were just to stop there and just look at this map and say, well, I don't know, you think maybe God doesn't decide the roll of the lot or the dice. Maybe when they cast lots, it messed up and they shouldn't have got this place, right? But here's what you need to know about Zebulun. Yes, geographically, Zebulun was not at the shore, unless you mean near Galilee. There's some hints there. Near the Sea of Galilee, not far, though that particularly belonged to Naphtali. And they were not bordering Sidon, unless you mean just the Phoenician people generally. But there are two other texts I'd like you to consider that also mention Zebulun, and then that'll get us towards an answer. So Deuteronomy chapter 33, this is a chapter that you really ought to read this whole chapter in connection with Genesis 49. Because it's another place where Moses gathers all the people of Israel and pronounces his blessings upon them tribe by tribe. It's a very similar sort of scene. But of Zebulun, in verses 18 and 19, we read this. "And of Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. They shall call peoples to their mountain. There they offer right sacrifices, for they draw from the abundance of the seas and the hidden treasures of the sand." Like they're in land. They're not on the sea, but they are, as a tribe, drawing from the abundance of the seas. Okay, then we could go to Judges chapter 5. Judges chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. The song of Deborah and Barak. The end of 14 says, "From Zebulun, those who bear the lieutenant staff, the princes of Issachar, came with Deborah, and Issachar faithful to Brock. Into the valley they rushed at its heels among the... Sorry, here we go. Hang on. Let's back down. 14. The beginning of 14. From Ephraim, their route, they marched down into the valley, following you, Benjamin, with your kinsmen. From Machir marched down the commanders. From Zebulun, those who bear the lieutenant's staff, or the commander's staff. The princes of Issachar, they're again connected. Zebulun and Issachar connected again there. And you had them in Deuteronomy connected with the sea, and here Zebulun is connected with the sea. So just all that to say, it seems like they're associated with the sea. Zebulun and Issachar kind of associated together. And particularly Zebulun and Issachar in Deuteronomy with trade that comes from the sea. Right? They're going to get this abundance out of the sea, even though they're not particularly on the sea. Well, Sidon, I'll say this, from the Phoenician people, Sidon is kind of their capital in terms of their trade and commerce. All the fishermen, all the sailors, they were always there in Sidon. And so Zebulun, even though they're landlocked, the Sea of Galilee is not far away. They're there trading and doing all kinds of business there, bringing it through, taking it out to the coast, having all sorts of business with the Phoenician people there, sending their men on to Sidon where they do trade, and they bring back riches. This is the nature of Zebulun. Always associated with the sea and with the trade that was centered in Sidon, even though they were landlocked. Issachar, it says, is a strong donkey, crouching between, let's look at our map again, and see here. Issachar, right next to Zebulun, coming up very much just kind of the tip to the Sea of Galilee there. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. Now the ESV uses that translates the end there, forced labor. And they have warrant to do so because most of the time in the Bible that word means like forced labor. You're forced to do it as a slave. You've been conquered and you're put to this sort of labor. But I don't think it has to mean that here, because the context doesn't dictate that it has to. It could just be he's doing this sort of hard labor. And the idea would be this. Issachar comes to the land. We know this from Judges chapter 1, verses 30 through 36. Let's say this. A lot of these northern tribes were having trouble possessing their land. And they mention by tribe, which ones were having trouble possessing their land. Issachar's not mentioned. So it may be that Issachar kind of got in there already, in which case this would be a positive thing, which is the way I want to read it. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. Like he's got all, it's not much land here. He's kind of tucked in, but he saw the resting place was good and the land was pleasant, and so he just got to work. He just went in there and started doing it. And they just started tilling up, and all these other places we can't get our land yet. Well, Issachar's in there, and they're doing just fine. So they wouldn't be mentioned in that way. Willingly working the land, going about his work. Or it could be negative. It could be that they also were having trouble getting in their land, though they weren't particularly mentioned there. And when they finally did do it, they were put to forced labor because they had so much trouble getting their land. They never really fought anybody off, and all they ever were was just a strong donkey to work the land for other people. Could be that. That'd be very negative. But again, because Moses says these are blessings, and we're not told this is a negative, and it could be read either way, I want to read it as a positive and say, it seems like they just went into work. They just started enjoying the land. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, but we're ready to do it. It's a good place. The land's fertile. Let's go. And they did fine. They did well. So, anyway, that's what I take in terms of Issachar. Dan then, verse 16, 17 and 18. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heel so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. It's a strange, we haven't run into anything like that yet. It's that insertion of verse 18, I wait for your salvation, O Lord. But let's just start with verses 16 and 17. I think You can sort of read the words of treachery in here, almost, that come from Dan's later history. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. The first hand, they're a small tribe. There's not many of them. But they're going to play a significant role. Samson comes from them. It's not just Samson either, but they are, small though they are in many ways a mighty tribe, at least early on. In some ways, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Even though he's so small, he's going to be, as one of the tribes, he's going to judge the people of Israel, just as the rest do. But look at the way it's described. He shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backwards. So they're like, compared to his enemies and to those who are around him, he's like a viper compared to a horse. He's just so small and insignificant. But he's strong, he's powerful, he bites at their heels, they run off. But it's not just he protected his land, there's this negative effect that bites the horse's heels so that the rider falls backward. Like there's a negative thing here. And I think the negativity of that is understood by Jacob, is declared in these words, and leads him to say, I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Like things are, when he considers Dan, he just has to say, God save us. May God help us. He didn't say that with the rest. He didn't say that with Judah. You'd think that would fit with Judah. He's going to rule until the obedience of all the peoples is his. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Come. I long for that. But he didn't say that then. He said it here when he's talking about Dan. And of course, things aren't always good with Dan. Judges chapter 5. This, again, the song of Deborah and Barak. Listen to this. Remember, Deborah and Barak had to rouse the armies, or the people of Israel to fight. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't come. And here some are rebuked. Gilead stayed, that is Gad, stayed beyond the Jordan. And Dan, why did he stay with the ships? Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, staying by his landings. Zebulun is a people who risked their lives to the death. Naphtali too, on the heights of the field. The kings came and they fought. Then fought the kings of Canaan. So there was this whole fight, and some of the people of Israel came to fight, but others didn't. And Dan didn't. Why did he stay? Judges chapter 18. Verse 1, in those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in, for until then no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So the people of Dan sent 5 able men from the whole number of their tribe, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to explore it. And they said to them, go and explore the land. And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. When they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. And they turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here? And he said to them, this is how Micah dealt with me. And he goes through all this. Verse 20, I'll skip all the way down to verse 21. So they turned and departed, putting the little ones out, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. When they had gone a distance from the home of Micah, the men who were, sorry, that's not where I want, yeah. The men who were in the houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan. And they shouted to the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, what is the matter with you that you come with such a company? And he said, you take my gods that I made and the priest, and go away with what have I left? How then do you ask me, what is the matter with you? And the people of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household. And the people of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his home. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made, and the priest who belonged to him, and they came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob. Then they rebuilt the city and lived in it, and they named the city Dan, after the name of Dan their ancestor, who was born to Israel. For the name of the city was Laish at the first. The people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made, as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. Not a proud moment, right? Yeah, they were vicious. Yeah, they were stronger than they appeared. They were a small company. They didn't have really an inheritance yet. They went over and just took it from these people. They took this guy's priest and his carved images and all this stuff, and he said, hey, don't take that from me. So what are you going to do about it? They went on and captured this other town because it was, why? Well, because it was a small place. It was out of the way. People couldn't really come protect us, so we'll just kill everybody there and take it for ourselves. Tear it down and then rebuild it how we want. We've got our own people, and we'll just worship here until, that's where they stayed. It's terrible. Judges chapter 19, verses 47 and 48. Oh, hang on. Joshua 19. I'm going to say it can't be Judges 19. Joshua chapter 19, verses 47 and 48. When the territory of the people of Dan was lost to them, the people of Dan went up and fought against Leshem, and after capturing it and striking it with the sword, they took possession of it and settled in it, calling Leshem Dan, after the name of Dan, their ancestor. This is the inheritance of the tribe of the people of Dan, according to their clans, these cities with their villages. That's it. That's where they were. It's awful. It's the kind of thing, if that's the kind of thing he's anticipating, you can see why he says, I will wait for your salvation. This is not the kind of... That story reads like Simeon and Levi almost. It's not as bad, but it reads almost like that. And what they had done, it's terrible. This is not the future for which he had hoped for the tribe of Dan. It's awful. So even though they did by lot get another area, they seem to have not settled there. They seem to have been generally north. Now, so Dan is small but mighty, and I think there's some negative things we can see there. He's waiting. Jacob is told, it says he's waiting for the salvation of God. When he thinks about this, the way that they strike at a horse's heel, the rider falls back. And then Gad, verse 19. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Well, where did Gad settle? Again, on the east side of the Jordan, right, north of Reuben. Early in their history, the Moabites were constantly raiding them. And then later, the Ammonites rose to power, and you had them as well. And their entire history was one of would have been one of fending off these raids, people coming through trying to take advantage. Jacob sees this. Raiders shall raid Gad. Yes, that happens. But he shall raid at their heels. They won't conquer him. Yes, their existence will be one where the people are constantly coming through and raiding them, but that's not going to overtake them. They will still raid at their heels. They will defend themselves. They'll be a people. Then Asher, verse 20. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. There is a text, I'm kind of a stretch here, but let me just go with it. In 1 Kings 4:7, really 1 Kings chapter 4, there's a text that talks about Solomon had it set up where every tribe had to take a month and they had to provide him with food for the month. And it just rotated around. Could it be that Asher was the only tribe that didn't have to borrow food from other places? Or when it was Asher's turn, that was birthday month or something like that. That was the best month because they had these delicacies. Asher's food shall be rich, he shall yield royal delicacies. He shall yield his delicacies, that is, to royalty. It could be that. It could also be that if you were to look at where Asher is, they're up there by Tyre, they were one of the tribes most frequently overrun or least possessed of their land, right? They had all this land, it was good land, but there were always times where they weren't really ruling it or all of it. And it could very well be that Asher's food shall be rich and he shall yield his delicacies to royalty is sort of just the way it goes for the tribe of Asher. and you're either giving it to Solomon and to the kings of Israel or the kings of the northern tribe, or you're giving it to these other kings who are imposing a tribute by you. But whatever it is, you've got great food and everybody wants it, and kings always want it. You can imagine it being a saying among the Asherites. You know, the fate of the Asherite, food for the kings. Sometimes is good, sometimes is bad, right? It could be something like this, right? It's like, depends on who's the king. We enjoy it or we don't, but we're always in the situation where we've got the best food and the kings want what we've got. So it's, in some ways it's good to be an Asherite, in some ways maybe not so good. But you could imagine something like some sort of a proverb among them, right? Asher's food shall be rich and he shall yield royal delicacies, right? Why do we have to always send food to the king? Because, my son, it's the fate of the Asherites. It's what we have. Naphtali, verse 21, is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Anybody else have a different translation? Verse 21, Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Adam, I guess you probably do.
He gives beautiful words.
Okay, right. So I've chosen to just read from this commentary here on this portion. First of all, I'm not going to read some of there's pages of debate about what these words even mean, but I'll just read some of the possible different translations this guy mentions as his 6 most likely. The one, Naphtali is a spreading terebinth, putting forth lovely bows. Naphtali is a racing stag, which bellows with trumpet notes. Naphtali is a hind let loose, giving forth sweet songs of freedom. Naphtali, a hind released, sheep of the fold are sold. Naphtali, a mountain ewe, was born, who gives birth to lambs of the fold. Or Naphtali, a productive hind, which brings forth beautiful fawns. Right? These are just the most likely, right? So it's so debated. So I just want to read some of what he says here. Where comment is made, all of the above, except for one interpretations, interpret verse 21 as positive. Naphtali will be productive and will have numerous and beautiful progeny, or descendants. One man reads the verse as the author's way of stating his disappointment with the tribe. They were born to be free, but instead they've become domesticated. Naphtali, a tribe which is little known, is praised in Judges 4, chapter 4, verses 6 and 10, and chapter 5, verse 18b, for its yeomen cooperation with Deborah in her tribe's fight with Canaanites. He was willing to abandon the safety of his own highlands and his hilly, wooded Galilean country in support of a vulnerable brother. To the best of our knowledge, this is one of the few areas of Canaan that show no signs of Canaanite occupation. This reference puts the tribe of Naphtali in a good light and would suggest that Jacob's words to Naphtali hint at the tribe's abilities in fighting. Other references give a different perspective on Naphtali. Thus the Naphtalites were unsuccessful in driving out the people of Beth Shemesh and Ben Anath, Judges 1:33, although they do subject the indigenous people to forced labor. Earlier, the second census in Numbers lists a decrease of 8,000 from the first census, 45,400 versus 53,400. Naphtali is one of 5 tribes to show a decline. As a result of the above data, it is difficult to be certain whether Jacob's blessing on Naphtali is positive or negative. Thus, Ellinger maintains that Naphtali, as the last of the Galilean tribes, gets a somewhat gloomy comment. It is compared to an unleashed hind, and this probably suggests the danger of its impulsive strength. In contrast, the evidence might lead one to the conclusion that it is uncertain whether Jacob's reference to Naphtali as an unleashed hind is his blessing to the tribe or is pejorative, maybe a reference to the tribe's residence in fighting. Hard to say. So all of that is there. It is in many ways hard to know what we do with Naphtali. Now, Joseph, we read, verse 22, is a fruitful bow by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely, yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. And from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father, who will help you, by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Now, what do we want to say on this? I just want to summarize it as I can, I guess. That Joseph being a fruitful bough by the spring, his branches running over a wall, that's a picture of prosperity, of blessing. You've got all the water you need. You've got springs, right? The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yes, that's true. That happened. We saw that with his own brothers. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. God strengthened him, and he did well. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. That is not saying that from Joseph is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, but rather Joseph's arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. His arms were made strong and agile by this one, the mighty one of Jacob. And from there, the mighty one of Jacob is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Verse 25, by the God of your father, who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. It's everything, right? He's going to have the rain. He's going to have springs. He's going to have the blessings of the womb. He's going to have all of this. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessing of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. There's so much blessing I have to give you. He gives him so much more than he gives any of the rest. This is what's going to happen to you. This is what's going to happen to you. For you, all these blessings. And it's certainly the case that Ephraim and Manasseh inherited the best of the land by far in terms of land that was most productive, that had the most blessing upon it. And this way, the rain, the springs, all of that, they had it best, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so in that sense, all this came to be true. Up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Joseph enjoyed these things. That's just their history. That's where they settled. They've got the best of it. And then Benjamin, lastly, verse 27, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at the evening dividing the spoil. It's a curious thing. Basically, just saying he's super aggressive. Like, what in the world? Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. So by his aggression, he would prove to be the equal of his brothers. Deborah and Barak, in their song and what they talk about in their history with the fight that they led, it was led by this tribe, by the tribe of Benjamin. That's a curious thing. This little tribe went out and led the whole thing. You might even think of the first king of Israel. Who was it? Who was the very first king in Israel? The very first king in Israel? Any of the kids can say? Saul, right? From the tribe of Benjamin, right? They wasn't supposed to be from the tribe of Benjamin. They were supposed to be from the tribe of Judah, but it was Saul. He's a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. It's natural that the first king would come from them, in terms of just who you would look at, someone from this tribe. And then also we could look at Psalm chapter 68. Psalm 68. Verse 27. I'll start in verse 26. Bless God in the great congregation, the Lord, O you who are Israel's fountain. There is Benjamin. It's like telling you to look. Look, there's Benjamin, the least of them, in the lead. The princes of Judah and their throng, the princes of Zebulun, the princes of Naphtali. So you've got all these different tribes there, and who's the one in the lead? It's Benjamin. And it's something like what we have here. Benjamin is he's just this tiny little guy. In that last census, actually, he was the least among them, 8,000. He's so small, but he's a ravenous wolf. He's in the lead. There's something about this man that again and again through the scripture, this tribe is sort of a leading tribe, even though they're so tiny. And this is something about what's spoken. There's no real significance here except for he just says, look, you're like a little Benjamin. You're like this ravenous wolf, right? You're going to, by your aggression, prove to be the equal of your brothers. And that's basically what happened. Now, what's our application and conclusion in all this? I mean, you might say, well, like, okay, well, we got through a chapter, or most of a chapter, but what's the point of all this? And that's a curious thing to ask, really. I mean, what is the point of all these things? What are we going to say about all this? Well, the first thing I want to say is this. I want to read one other passage. There's a couple places in Scripture we could turn to for this, but I'm going to read Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 18. Speaking of God, you show steadfast love to thousands, but you repay the guilt of fathers to their children after them. O great and mighty God, whose name is the Lord of hosts, great in counsel and mighty indeed, whose eyes are open to all the ways of the children of man, rewarding each one according to his ways and according to the fruit of his deeds. Does that ring true when you a text like this? God shows steadfast love to thousands, but you repay the guilt of fathers to their children after them. Why is the tribe of Reuben not preeminent? Because their father. His sins. Why are Simeon and Levi scattered and kind of no account in many ways in the people of Israel? Because of their father. Why is Judah rewarded? Because of the tribe of Judah, because of their father. How about Joseph? Because of their father. This is the way it is. Like, it's just the world that God has made is this way. Children go through what they go through because of their parents, right? We can say all we want, well, it's not right. Like, people say, well, it's not right to judge them for what I did. Okay. They will be affected by it, regardless. But God has so ordered the world that many times children do suffer as a result of judgment upon the parents, to the third and fourth generation. Deuteronomy says he visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generation, but shows steadfast love and forgiveness to thousands. So kind of the balance is tipped more, 3 or 4 generations for the sins, thousands for the forgiveness and the mercy and the steadfast love. So on balance, we see where God is here far more, but it's just the world He made and the way the righteous judge of the earth runs His world, that the sins of the parents do flow down in terms of judgment upon even the next generations for generations to come. That's just a reality. That's the world God has made. It's also true that He rewards to each one according to his ways. The very next verse, right? Verse 18, you show steadfast love to thousands, but you repay the guilt of fathers to their children after them. O great and mighty God, whose name is the Lord of hosts, great in counsel and mighty indeed, whose eyes are open to all the ways of the children of man, rewarding to each one according to his ways and according to the fruit of his deeds. So it's also true. Now, if we were just to talk about human experience, none of us would have a problem with that. If I were to say, you as an individual grow up in a context where you have parents and a society at large, your parents, based on the choices they've made, you're either wealthy or poor, right? You either have many friends or few. You're either loved or hated in your community. You either have a good name or a bad name, all as a result of things that happened before you got here. The consequences of your parents. And you're going to live in a society where people judge you and view you based on your name and your associations. We all say, yep, that's just the way it is. And we could also say to you, but you're going to go out into this world and make a name for yourself. You yourself will have to be accountable for the actions you make. You can't just ride other people's coattails. The time will come when people judge you on your own individual basis. We understand that and have no problem with that when we look out at the world around us. But when we consider God and His judgment, we think, well, God should only consider me. I shouldn't have any consequences for those who went ahead of me. God doesn't judge the world that way. He doesn't. Whole tribes, their fate for well over 1,000 years was decided on the basis of some of them things that their dad did one day. Well, from now on, you guys don't have any inheritance in the land. We don't have land of our own. You have to live in a city. Why? Well, remember what Levi did? Remember what Simeon did? Why do we live out here? Why can't we were the firstborn tribe? Why don't we get these things? Remember what Reuben did that day? Remember what he tried to do? Right? Why does Joseph get 2 tribes? Well, remember what our fathers did to their father? Remember how faithfully he served God and how faithfully he served us and how he just forgave us all? That's why he gets these things. Yeah, but they didn't get those things. Yeah, but that's just the way it is. That's how God rules this world. That's the first application. The consequences of our actions are massive. I don't say this so that you look out at those who went before you and point the finger, but rather you consider your own actions and consider how much they affect in the world. Like, your life between you and God has massive consequences for people around you and those that follow after you. These things matter. What else? That's one application. Notice what God was able to show through Jacob and what he faithfully fulfilled and carried out. Just that happened. That here was this old man Jacob getting ready to die, and God showed him the fate of millions of people over thousands of years in general terms. He knew what was going to take place, and he spoke those things. And God showed not just Jacob those things, but through Jacob he showed these nations, or these clans and these peoples, what would happen as a nation. I'm sure that as these things took place, they didn't all take place in the same day, right? It's not like he spoke this word to all of them. That happened in one day. But it's not as though one day, exactly 500 years later, all of them came true. But rather, they came true, one of them over here. 30 years later, another thing came true. 100 years later, another thing came true. They took place and were fulfilled throughout their history. As these things are taking place, the people of God were to gain real confidence in the rock-solid nature of the words of God. They were to take stock of the certainty with which these things happened. They were to carry that with them then when they considered those things God had declared would come to pass but had not yet come to pass. They were to say, hey, God said these 7 things and they haven't happened yet. Yeah, but remember these other 13 things he did say and they all happened. Exactly like he said they would. So let's trust him for these other things. That was to be in effect. That before they were even really separate clans or anything, before they even had the land, God had prophesied ahead of time about what their inheritances would look like. So when they rolled those lots and it came to one or the other, lo and behold, it was exactly the kind of place God said we would be in. Or their history down the road was just as God said it would be. So they were to gain also, I think, a real reverence for God himself in all areas of reverence and fear and worship. The idea, just to think of this, that we don't really order ourselves in tribes in this country, right? But we do, the closest thing I think we have to that, and right now is kind of red state, blue state, like people kind of identify themselves as that state. Right? We've got, whether if you're a red voter in a blue state, you're like, oh, I'm in a blue state, and you're just like, you hate it, or vice versa. Or if you're a red in a red or a blue in a blue, like you have a certain feeling about these things, you kind of identify that way, kind of politically. But if someone were to declare before our nation became a nation, what peoples were going to come here, when they were going to come, what their experience generally would be, where they would settle, what their long history would be like, how they would relate to one another. And then we found ourselves 1,000 years later saying, wait a minute, was this written like last week by someone who knew what happened? No, it was written way before. There would be awe and wonder that had happened. And it's to be this way here. Like God revealed these things to Jacob. When they see these things happening, it's meant to it's yet another reminder that the God who they serve is the God who rules heaven and earth, all these things, absolutely everything. And in all of that, I think there should be a real sense of thankfulness to God that God had chosen them for such an end as this. Like it's not just, well, I know that God's in charge, but this God who's in charge and rules everything and said all these things would happen has also made me these promises of a good future. He loves us. He's tender. Look what he does for us. So there's such a sense of humility and of thankfulness toward God. Not just that these things are true about him, but that he's chosen to act to you in a certain way. An added dimension of love, thankfulness, and worship for the loving kindness that God has extended to them as a people is meant, I think, to be gleaned from these sorts of things as they come true. That God cared to do these things for them. It's quite a thing. Well, that's all I have out of this chapter. Again, there are, by no means am I saying this was an adequate look at every one of these tribes and their fulfillment, but I don't feel like there's enough benefit to justify multiple messages in this chapter. So we just cram it all in, and it's a little bit of a long one, but we got through it all, hopefully with at least an adequate enough explanation of the fulfillment of these prophecies as they were given, and a sense a little bit of the scene as it might have looked, and then some application. So are there questions or comments on any of this?